Welcome to meeting number 28 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website, and the webcast always shows the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Today, our committee is resuming its study on sexual misconduct within the Canadian Armed Forces. For the benefit of the witnesses, comments should be addressed through the chair. And if you want interpretation, there is a button at the bottom of your screen where you can choose English or French. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly for our translators. And when you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. And so now I would like to welcome our witnesses, who will begin our discussions with 5 minutes of opening remarks, followed by questions. First of all, we have Major General Stephen Whelan, who is the Acting Commander, Military Personnel Command and Chief Military Personnel. And we also have Mr. Kin Choi, who is the Assistant Deputy Minister, Human Resources. And so we're going to begin with Mr. Choi. You have 5 minutes and you may start.
Bonsoir. Merci.
Good evening. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I thank you for having invited me to participate in your discussion as the Assistant Deputy Minister, Human Resources Civilian at the Department of National Defence. I've been a civil servant for about 24 years now, and I've occupied a number of positions in various departments. The National Defence Team is a large group. It's complex, and it includes civil servants and military personnel across Canada and outside of Canada. Among the civil servants of the Department of National Defence, we have 18 collective agreements covering them that cover a great number of groups of professionals, support workers, specialists, research experts, and scientists. Most of them are represented by 10 different unions with which we work. In my position as Assistant Deputy Minister, Human Resources Civilian, I am largely in charge of 4 specific functions, specifically pay, ensuring a safe workplace, diversity and inclusion, and labor relations for about 26,000 million employees.
Relating to people management, including staffing and learning and development, classification and organizational design, labor relations, and compensation. As well, we are responsible for developing and implementing plans, policies, and programs to recruit, develop, and retain diverse individuals, ensure the Canadian Armed Forces are supported at home and abroad. In all aspects of our work, we are committing to upholding the defense team's values and ethics, integrity, as well as the well-being of our employees. Though important steps have been taken to address the overall health and well-being of the defense team, clearly we have much work to do to effect enduring change. It is imperative that we continue to pursue this change in order to rebuild an environment of trust, respect, and accountability reflective of the Canadians we serve. We will listen to all perspectives and make informed decisions to ensure that our core values lead to this meaningful change. Finally, in my capacity as Head of Human Resources for our public service employees, I take my responsibility as functional authority for workplace harassment, discrimination, and implementation of C-65 very seriously to ensure fairness and due process regardless of rank or position. I acknowledge there may be questions related to ongoing complaints. However, I will be unable to address the specific nature of these cases as they are addressed through the independent process and current and recourse mechanism currently available to complainants. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Very good. And now we will have the Major General Whelan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members, for inviting me today to participate in this committee discussion in my capacity as Acting Commander, Military Personnel Command for the Canadian Armed Forces, a position I have held for just about a month. The Military Personnel Command is responsible for the management of many of the personnel policies that support all members of the CAF, full-time and part-time, as well as their families. This includes recruiting, basic training, professional military education, health services, strategy, career management, compensation and benefits, and support to families, as well as transition services, history and heritage, and honors and recognition. In essence, in the role of military personnel command is that of an important enabler for the Canadian Armed Forces. We recruit, develop, and support all of our members so that they can be their very best for their service to Canada. Like many of my colleagues who have appeared before this committee, I have over 30 years of service, and in that time, I have observed an evolution of our organization. The CAF of today is not what it was when I joined in 1990. I see a more diverse force at every level, and it has made us better. Our differences make our team and our culture stronger, more effective, and more resilient, both at home and abroad. And while there's been so much positive change, we know that there is still a great deal of work that needs to be done to make the Canadian Armed Forces a more welcoming and safe environment for all of our members. And I know that we have great people and great leaders at all levels who are committed to making the forces better, and I'm one of them. All members must be able to trust that the CAF will be there for them throughout their careers, from recruits to veterans, from cradle to grave. CAF members must know that the institution is there to support them at the beginning of their careers in basic training and in our military colleges. CAF must be there for them during their careers through merit-based promotions to foster their career aspirations, as well as using and through our health services, and right to the end of their careers with our transition service to ensure a positive adjustment out of uniform into civilian life. So every person must feel part of our team at every stage of their career. And so, yes, I know our culture needs to continue to change so that we can reach our full potential as an institution in the service of Canada and continue to reflect Canadian society and its values. And so to energize that culture change, every member of the defense team, military or civilian, must treat their teammates with respect, dignity, and honor. And so we all agree that we need to strive to be more equitable, more diverse, and more inclusive. And we also need to work to regain the trust that has been lost from some of our teammates. And so to do so, we need to first listen and learn, and then act upon those recommendations. These issues don't just affect select individuals, they impact the entire defense team. And we recognize that our culture needs to change, and we're committed to making that happen. Madam Chair, thank you for your time. I look forward to answering questions.
Thank you so much. And now we will begin our first round of questions. We'll start with Ms. Sahota for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Major General, you just spoke about being in this role just for about a month or so. So my question is, could you please provide details under what circumstances your predecessor was removed from his position and how you became the acting in this current position?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. My previous job was the Deputy Commander of Military Personnel Command. And within the military structure, when a leader is unable to perform his duties or is absent, the Deputy Commander steps up. In the case of my supervisor, I'm unable to comment on the current status of Admiral Edmondson, as those details are not, I'm not privy to them. But what I can say is that sexual misconduct has no place in the Canadian Forces, and when an allegation is made, regardless of the rank, there is a process to be followed that has to respect all stakeholders. So at this time, I'm unable to give you any further details other than I have been appointed by the Chief of Defense Staff, and I've willingly stepped forward to take command of the organization at this time.
You also said in your presentation that the Canadian Armed Forces is better than it was before. we've had sexual misconduct in the 90s. We see that today. We've had witnesses come here before us over and over again and tell us their stories and tell us that investigation wasn't conducted or evidence was lost, and we still don't have the 25% women in Canadian Armed Forces. And what makes you think it's better than it was before?
So the words Madam Chair, that I used were that the Canadian Forces is better than it was when I joined in 1990. You know, when I joined in 1990, there was no such thing as diversity. There were no such thing as policies for people. There were no policies for family. You know, there was a running joke that if we wanted you to have a family, we would have issued you one. There were no support networks for families. There was no mental health support. There was no discussion of inclusivity. We didn't have harassment policies when I joined the Canadian Forces, which was a year after women were allowed to join any trade in the Canadian Forces. So from my perspective, notwithstanding that we do have these issues, the Forces is still better than when I started in 1990, 30 years ago. Thank you.
So you spoke about that there's no place for sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces. We would agree with you. That's why we're here discussing how do we change the culture so that that doesn't happen to women anymore. So as the most senior military member responsible for military personnel, how would you reassure all those in uniform that the generals and admirals leading the Canadian Forces will act with honor and integrity, embodying the highest level of military professional conduct when the former Chiefs of Defense Staff, General Vance and General MacDonald, and your predecessor, Admiral Edmondson, are all currently under investigation for behavior that is diametrically opposed and runs counter to everything they swore an oath to uphold?
Madam Chair, that's a great question, and it's a hard question. And that's why we're having these conversations right now, is to figure out, you know, what it is we need to do to make the profession better than it is, and the institution I think that Canadians want it to be. So I'll just make a comment about what culture is and how I see it coming together in terms of how you framed the question. So the culture is really what we value and how we curate it in the Canadian Forces. And so I do accept the criticism that we do have senior leaders who have allegedly acted contrary to the behaviors that they rejected while they were in uniform or are still in uniform. But the fact of the matter is culture is what we value. And so there are no easy solutions right now. So I stole this line from one of my leaders who is responsible for recruiting and training, and she said to me, General Whalen, we're not living up to the better values of our profession. And I think she is absolutely right.
Can there be a culture change if those senior leaders that I listed here are not held accountable?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Absolutely, anybody, anyone, regardless of rank, has to absolutely be held accountable. And there is a process in place that energizes, applies itself when these allegations take place, and those processes are in play at this time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
How would you change the culture then? Because Operation Honor was a failure. What would you do differently?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. That's a hard something hard to say, you know, in perhaps a 30-second soundbite. But what I can say from a military personnel perspective is I can at least initiate the changes to things and to processes that that are under my authority. And so for me, it starts with people. It starts with making sure that people start with respecting themselves. I don't need training courses. I don't need professional development program to tell people and enforce the rules to make sure that you respect people. But what I can change in the Canadian Forces are some of the functions I'm responsible for. So we need to change the face of Canadian Forces recruiting, both who does it and how we do it. I think we need to change because Canadians need to see themselves in the faces of the recruiters and the lived experience of those recruiters if they think they want to join the Canadian Forces.
Very good. Merci
Thank you.
beaucoup. Maintenant, nous allons...
Thank you very much. And now we will go to Mr. Serret for 6 minutes, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for your service, Major General Whelan. And thank you as well, Mr. Choi, for your involvement and your wish to find solutions. My question is for both of you. I would like to focus on the victims and the survivors. If we take into account the number of people whom you work with, either within the Canadian Forces or elsewhere within the Department of National Defence, what have you been doing to build the trust of survivors? And how can you ensure that every place of work is respectful and safe? And by all means, go ahead, Major General Whelan, to begin with.
I'll just make a general comment about trust, and then if we want to go deeper, we can do that. So how do I win back the trust of the survivors, the victims, our teammates that are questioning whether the leadership is serious about leading the Canadian Forces? So I've learned in my 30 years that it's really hard to get people to trust me. But I've also learned that it takes 1 second to lose the trust of our teammates. And so I know that trust has been broken with our teammates, and that loss is devastating to me. And that was reinforced to me when I listened to the testimonies on Tuesday. I have a daughter who's 22 years old considering joining the Canadian Forces. It was like a punch in the gut, and I still feel it even right now as I'm speaking. So our whole team is watching us to see what we're going to do. And that's what we're doing. And I take that responsibility very, very seriously. So we are listening. And I think we need to do that, at least initially, to hear our members, because I don't think we've given them the voice that they have asked for. And I have been listening, and I tell you, some of what I hear is ugly. It's uncomfortable, and I'm still processing it. But I'm committed to trying to make a difference as we move forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Chow?
Madam Chair, would you like me to pick up from there? Madam Chair, I think it's a really important point that's been raised by General Whelan, that we have a work to do to build on the trust. While we have myriads of programs that are already in place across the public service, and National Defence public service employees are part of that, I think the tone needs to be set at the top. And we have to look at how we're building our executive cadre, how we're providing them with support and training, providing them with the right compass and direction in what we expect them as leaders. I think we're on that path right now, but there's a lot of work that remains to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, General Whelan. We've heard extensively how, and you alluded to this a bit, but we've heard extensively how the fear of reprisal creates barriers for survivors wanting to come forward. How can we better protect the safety of people who come forward while also respecting their confidentiality?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So first of all, reprisals go against everything we are in the Canadian Forces. No defense team member should ever feel unsafe or alone in an organization that talks about teamwork the way that we do. You know, and I saw the stories last night and I listened, and I'm sorry that my teammate has felt that was listed in one of the media articles as afraid to be named. Reprisals have no place in the Canadian Forces. Leaders who engage in reprisals have no place in the Canadian Forces. So we owe that support and we owe that respect to those who trust us, families, members who trust us for their own safety. And so essentially reprisals is about the use of power, not the abuse of it. And so one of the things we need to do is we need to focus on what leaders understand to be their boundaries and whether they understand what their responsibilities. I am an infantry officer, and I was brought up to understand that leadership is a privilege which must be curated. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Mr. Chow, do you have anything to add to that related to the reprisals? Mr. Chow?
You're on mute.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I had technical difficulties with the translation, so I couldn't hear it. I was trying to flip back and forth. Can the question be repeated, please?
So, Mr. Chow, I'm just asking if people have a fear of reprisal, and what do you think to respect things for people to come forward so that there's a sense of, respecting and their confidentiality? We have about 30 seconds.
Thank you. I'll go very quickly. I think in the main, that's a natural consequence that there are that fear, especially in large organization. I think there's an opportunity to rethink how we do labor relations and provide that trust and support so that privacy, confidentiality, and procedural fairness are entrusted in the system. I apologize for the technical difficulties.
Pas de problème. Merci beaucoup.
No problem. That's fine. And Ms. Larouche, you now have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. To begin with, allow me to congratulate our witnesses for coming before us and for the work that you're doing at the Department of Defence and for the Canadian Armed Forces, Mr. Choi and Major General Whelan. Bravo. Mr. Choi, what do you know about the Privy Council Office? Just to understand what sort of work the Privy Council Office can do in matters of sexual assault, is that part of its mandate? We know that the Ombudsman tried to pass responsibility for an investigation to the PCO. Is that its mandate? Can you tell us more about that?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for that question. I'm not an expert with PCO machinery and how it's worked. I've had a relationship with PCO. I've worked with senior personnel. So I would refrain from providing any expert comments on that. Thank you.
So then you couldn't tell us what information made its way to the Privy Council Office or were given to the Minister so that he might go ahead with an investigation? This doesn't seem to be something you feel able to do.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's not something I was personally involved with, so I would not have anything to offer.
Parfait.
Very well. Then I will go to something else. Perhaps Major General Whelan could respond, or Mr. Choi. To what extent do you have confidence in having a path towards dignity and respect? The Canadian Armed Forces in matters of sexual misconduct. I'd like to hear you on what you think of the way forward to dignity and respect. Perhaps you could say something about that.
Madam Chair, I'll go ahead.
We can start with Mr. Choi, and then we'll go with the General.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm optimistic, and I'm hopeful that we are at a point in time, and an inflection point in time, that national defense and the Canadian Armed Forces can make significant changes.
General? General, you're on mute, or we can't hear you very well. Shall we suspend briefly, and the clerk, could you look into the technical issues with the General?
Madam Chair, can you hear me okay?
Yes, now we can hear you.
I just watched him unplug the thingy from one USB to another. So I will attempt to answer the question quickly. So how confident am I? Here's why I am confident and encouraged. We're actually having some meaningful discussions on cultural change. We are listening to people at all levels, from the top down across, up and down the Canadian Forces. We have accepted the flaws of Operation Honor and are moving forward with successes. There's an incredible conversation going on at this point on support to victims, and I am encouraged by the defense-wide and the national-wide conversation that is occurring about how we can make our profession better. So I am encouraged there is a pathway forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Parfait, très bien. Écoutez, je vais donc...
Very well, thank you. I will move on to my next question. We have learned that Wendy Eyre, the acting Chief of Defence Staff, had asked for a memorandum about the way complaints were being treated. Could you tell us something about this? How complaints against higher-ranking members of the Canadian Armed Forces are managed? How do you go about underscoring the presence of any sexual misconduct? What's the process? What does a victim need to do? Is there something that we need to improve there on the process level?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. I am not an expert in the field of military police or sexual misconduct reporting, but to your question in terms of senior leadership allegations, so the system is based on a process that is applied evenly to all members of the Canadian Forces, regardless of rank. The issue of the product that General Eyre had asked for was essentially an aid memoir or something that he could have in order to ensure that he was very clear on the process. I think it's clear that we haven't seen this kind of these allegations in the past, and therefore we wanted to ensure that there was no sense that there was a special process being applied to senior leaders. In terms of reporting and victim support, so if I receive an allegation, I have a choice to bring it to the military police. I can choose to, depending on the severity of the allegation, make an assessment and assign it to a unit level investigation. I always have the opportunity to consult with our legal folks. And if need be, I can consult with the SMRC and Dr. Preston to assist me through my decision-making process.
Very good.
Thank you.
And now we'll go to Ms. Matheson for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to both witnesses. I was really, I'm really hopeful now hearing from you, Mr. Whelan, that when you said specifically leadership is a privilege that must be curated, and you talked about taking that responsibility, taking that on, really listening. I mean, I think that this is key. I'd like to actually ask both of you, though, in terms of both the bureaucracy within national defense, within, of course, the armed forces, the CAF itself, when we talk about the recognition of that leadership and holding people to account at all levels, you know, from the lowest first ranks up until the highest of senior leaders, and that responsibility. Is it also true that in that responsibility we can't turn away from some of these stories, but not listening, not hearing, refusing to hear, that causes a lot of the problems as well?
So thank you, Madam Chair. I will. I'll make an attempt to see if I can respond. That's a really complicated. It's a question about leadership and how we integrate process into the profession. And the profession is it's hard to put its hand around it because we operate on values and an ethical framework. And of course, what we have here is seemingly leaders who are supposedly representing this framework and these values, and they're not living up to it. And rightly so, the victims are calling out these leaders. And the process is fully engaged on holding all leaders accountable to investigate these kinds of allegations. And I think in the fullness of time, as these investigations mature, then we will see, how that process engages itself when we see these allegations. Just from a military personnel command perspective, one of the other processes is the administrative review process, which I am responsible for, which is also another mechanism to determine outcomes of conflicts and people issues. And so there are multiple mechanisms that the Canadian Forces has at its disposal in order to bring justice to victims who bring forward allegations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to build on General Whalen's comments. I think throughout the public service and where we find ourselves in 2021, there's a real opportunity to look at how labor relations is constructed. I think it's still very much a industrial era, relations era type of model where it's a bit adversarial. We've been making improvements, working with our unions on this, and I think it's time for us to turn things around so that people are at the very core and at the center of how we solve issues, and that we provide a personalized sense of their well-being throughout the process versus an adversarial process where we move up the ladder in terms of grievances. So I think there's opportunities for us to do that so that we can support people no matter what the level of part of the organization they may be in. Thank you.
So, and part of, I mean, what we've heard certainly is that a lot of times that hierarchy, that command structure, it gets in the way of how people feel confident to challenge what's happened, to speak out against what's happened. We've also in this committee, and I've referenced it before, there's this disconnect between those at the top, those who say things are all right or things are improving or things are moving in a certain direction, versus the stories and that we've heard, and you've referenced them again, but the stories that we heard even 2 days ago in this committee. I mean, I had someone who emailed me and they, after we heard from the Provost Marshal, and said, as long as those investigators hold military rank, and the higher the rank for that individual, the more that comes into play, and they can push indirectly messaging and interference. So we've talked a lot about independent structures. How would you advocate, or do you believe that those independent structures are key to the investigation to ensuring that people are treated fairly within both the armed forces and overall military? Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, I'll take a shot. So I am, when we talk about independent structures, there is value in an independent structure, whether it's a structure for reporting or a structure for looking at the Canadian Forces. I think all of those options need to be on the table. In terms of the feeling that perhaps that there is an interference by Canadian Forces leadership, the uniform, the chain of command, I think it speaks to something that I think I will be taking on as a role, is trying to bring more of the human attributes into leadership developed than the bureaucracy or the technical or the theoretical aspects of what we have in terms of our leadership models. What we need to do is actually bring human qualities back into leaders, bring in empathy, have people understand what the other person has gone through as you try to lead people. I go back to the first rule I learned on my first day: leadership is a privilege. And so for me particularly, I think the options are on the table for independent structures, but I think it's about focusing on making better leaders and growing them earlier in their careers so they can be who we want them to be when they become senior leaders. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Very good. All right, and now we'll go to our second round of questions with Ms. Alislav for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Choi, you said that reprisals are a natural occurrence, and yet you need to have procedural fairness in order to ensure that this culture changes. Yet it was on your watch that someone in your chain of command made a complaint on behalf of someone that reported to him, and then felt reprisals because of it, submitted his own harassment complaint for those reprisals, subsequently blamed externally for the harassment of his subordinate when it wasn't him, and has spent 5 years grieving and trying to make way through the process. Is that how you would characterize procedural fairness?
Madam Chair, I wasn't able to hear the first part of the question, just the last part. I assume that was addressed to me. I believe the question is around Mr. Boland, if I picked up all of that. As I said in my opening remarks, I can't speak to individual cases. I can offer that from a procedural fairness perspective. When we get complaints and on the public service, employees are represented by their union. There are clear set up processes that we follow in looking at the nature of the complaint and the severity of the complaint. There are situational assessments that we go through that are done by labor relations. And if they meet the certain criteria that are well established by Treasury Board guidelines, there may be an investigation.
Mr. Choi. Thank you. Who do you report to, Mr. Choi?
I report to the Deputy Minister.
And who assigned you the task of assessing Mr. Boland's complaint against the Deputy Minister?
The Deputy Minister received a complaint. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. I was asked to look into it.
By whom?
Once I receive it, that's part of my duty. So I looked into it. I looked into the nature of the complaint. I checked in with our legal counsel and provided options to go forward in terms of how it would
And then
proceed.
Subsequently, you dismissed the complaint against your boss, the Deputy Minister, on the 19th of February, 2021. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. After we went through a review of the process.
It's a yes or no, Mr. Choi. Did you dismiss the complaint against your boss?
I believe technically it's not whether or not it was dismissed. It was whether or not it was founded or not founded. And in this case, it was not founded.
But you made that determination about your boss. As the functional authority for civilian human resources, you have the responsibility for all procedural and behavioral wrongdoing on behalf of the Deputy Minister. So you're saying that includes reviewing the Deputy Minister's behavior. Is that correct?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. While I'm the functional authority, I exercise that functional authority with the support of both my staff, who are professionals in labor relations, as well as legal counsel.
Yes, but ultimately you're the authority and you've dismissed a claim of your boss. Is that correct?
Again, I'm not privy in talking about a specific case.
I didn't say what case. I said just in general. So could you table for this committee the document where it says that a subordinate is granted the legal authority to review, investigate, or dismiss a complaint against a superior or a peer within the same chain of command?
Thank you for that question, Madam Chair. As I said, as part of the process as the functional authority, I would take in all the information of a complaint, the nature of it, seek advice from legal counsel.
Is there a document that says a subordinate has the authority to clear a superior?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I received my delegation through a functional delegation authority that's assigned to me.
Can a superior delegate to you to absolve the superior of anything?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, as in my role, as I'm delegated overall for the activities and programs and services of human resources on the civilian side of the national defense, I have the authority to look at issues as they come in, and we treat all the issues, regardless of rank and level, in providing advice and determining whether or not
Can you
harassment
confirm
have
that?
taken place.
I'm sorry, that's your time.
Thank you very much.
Now we're going to Ms. Zahid for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to both General Whalen and Mr. Choi for appearing before the committee today. My first question is for Mr. Choi. Mr. Choi, in previous testimony, a witness alleged that the Deputy Minister of National Defense had broken the law. Did the Deputy Minister break the law?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. In my professional opinion, and looking at the various cases and through legal counsel, the Deputy Minister, to the best of my knowledge, have not broken any laws.
Thank you, Mr. Choi. My next question is for General Whalen. General Whalen, given that education, training, health services, recovery, rehabilitation, and reintegration, operational trauma, stress, support centers, just to name a few, fall under your purview, can you please discuss the current gaps and the steps you are taking to address them?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. That is an exercise that's ongoing right now. And so we're looking at all of the systemic and institutional, at least we are in MilPers Command, we're looking at all the systemic and institutional frameworks that provide the support to people across the Canadian Forces with a view to looking at where the strengths are and the gaps at the same time so we can reinforce where we are strong and address where we are weak. I mean, there are a number of areas we are looking at. I can speak to two off the top of my head. Health services is notwithstanding the great work that they are doing for Canadians across this country, when they're not doing that, they're trying to work on how to rebuild and modernize Canadian Forces health services for the future, which is a monumental task. We know how difficult the healthcare is in this country. And then I would probably speak to Transition Group, which stood up as an entity in 2018, in December 2018, to look after our ill and injured, but who are now assuming more and more responsibility for not just ill and injured, but over the next 4 years will be taking on the release and support and transition functions for all members of the Canadian Forces. So it's a work in progress. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. My next question is also for you, General Whalen. Some witnesses have appeared in this committee who have discussed how, when it comes to sexual misconduct, survivors have experienced many negative effects on their mental health and also physical well-being. What have you done to ensure that the Canadian Armed Forces members have access to trauma-informed services?
So that's a very timely question, Madam Chair. We are in discussions at this point on assessing how we can better serve victims who suffer sexual misconduct arising from service. Those conversations are maturing. I feel confident. I have great confidence in our health services enterprise, who by default their job is to determine a program of care for whatever the injury might be. And so I'm confident we have the mechanisms to address their concerns and their injuries, but we are in conversations and discussions to see what more we can do to provide support to victims of sexual trauma. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. My next question for you, Mr. Whalen, is that now there are Stats Canada data available around the Canadian Armed Forces members reporting sexual misconduct. So how will you use this data going forward as changes are implemented?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. If I recall, and I don't have the stats in my in my brain, but if I recall, one of the statistics speaks to sexual assault on basic training, and so I guess the first thing I would say is, everyone has a right to feel safe on basic training or any training. And we owe that to those who serve their country. And so I think we need to look at that. So the steps that we're taking, and in fact, I had a discussion today just to prepare myself, and I spoke to the CO of the actual recruit school and of the 2 military colleges, and I have some of their notes here, but I think it starts with leaders across the Canadian Armed Forces having zero tolerance for it. And we have to ensure that leaders enforce the message, that they live and lead the behaviors we want from troops, whether they're wearing their uniform or not. We need to make sure that the leaders, the trainers, the students actually have a better understanding of what sexual assault is. And
Merci
I think
beaucoup.
Thank you.
C'est la fin de votre temps.
Thank you very much. This brings your time to an end. We now have Ms. Larouche with 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to go back to our 2 guests to ask whether you're aware of the following. If a military officer is found guilty of a sexual assault by a military tribunal, what are the consequences? Could you tell us what they are so that we could better understand what happens when these things are found to have happened?
Madam Chair, I regret that I don't think I can answer that question justifiably. I think that is a question for the JAG or the Judge Advocate General. It's a legal question, and it's probably very situationally dependent. I wish I could give you more than that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Et Monsieur Choi, de votre côté?
And Mr. Choi, do you have an answer for us?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think my answer would be very similar to General Whalen. This is not an area of my expertise. I believe that the Judge Advocate General would be better placed to answer that question. Thank you.
Parfait. Alors, pour terminer,
Very well, then. Another question, then. In your opinion, what sort of problems should the committee be really focusing on through this study? What are the changes that could be brought to bear to really solve this problem? Could you really explain what the core issue behind sexual misconduct is and help us, the committee, really focus on what we need to do? Where is the change?
Monsieur Choi or Monsieur Whalen?
Either of you.
Madam Chair, I think where things need to change is people's understanding and their knowledge and their education and their, how well they were able to understand the topic. And, just previously I was making reference to ensuring that leaders, trainers, students, they actually understand what sexual assault actually is. And I'm not sure that people do understand that. And I think that was probably one of the first starting points. The other thing I would say is that we need more data. We need more research. We do have those mechanisms in the Canadian Forces to seek out the data, the understanding, the academic, but we would certainly welcome outside advice in terms of being able to move that particular agenda forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Very good. Ms. Matheson, 2.5 minutes.
Madam Chair. Several of the witnesses in our past meetings drew our attention to the fact that a lot of the supports aren't available to them due to language, due to their location, due to their posting. One woman was, of course, on a ship, and there are limited resources and personnel. But some of the witnesses also specifically spoke about the need and the huge barrier that they face because there isn't adequate childcare provided to military personnel. So could you both maybe address what you're actively doing to ensure that women in the armed forces can equally serve by being provided those services, specifically childcare, that they need?
Thanks for the question, Madam Chair. I think it speaks to the, so yes, I agree with you, I think, and we are very well aware that childcare is a contributing element to women serving in the Canadian Forces. In fact, 34% of women have indicated that childcare is one of the elements, not the only element, but one of them, and it's near the top. We have recently undertaken some work to figure out what it would take to be able to deliver a childcare capability in the Canadian Armed Forces. That work is ongoing. I don't think it's mature enough to be able to present at this stage, but we are looking at it. And I think the advantage here, if there is anything, a silver lining, is that COVID has acutely pointed out the challenges that women face in a pandemic environment. And so what we are trying to do is leverage those lessons in order to help establish some of those capabilities for our members in service who need them.
Would it be fair, sorry, just before you get to that, would it be fair to, once you actually get to a mature place of being able to report that, could you send that data and that information to our committee?
As long as thank you for the question, Madam Chair. It won't be up to me to determine what the mature level of it is, but we'll certainly take that on notice and we'll provide that if we can. Thank you.
Excellent. And now we'll go to Ms. Sahota, who's splitting her time with Ms. Shin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Major General, it seems like the big boys on the top are circling their wagon and trying to protect each other. So I'm going to ask you, do you believe in order to address sexual misconduct culture that exists in the military and that we've seen can exist as low as the Royal Military College all the way up to the Chief of the Defense Staff, do you believe that we should be addressing this from our most senior level and making it our way down? Or should we try something at the entrance level and allow the senior leadership to go unchallenged?
That's a great question, Madam Chair. So I'll give you the infantry officer answer is we need to attack all levels at once. But at some point, I think I said earlier that the beginning of a career is important, and we need to grow good people, good leaders, good followers from the get-go. That certainly doesn't take our eyes off of serving leaders who still need that professional development and still need that accountability. One of the things we are hearing from our members in our listening sessions is they want leader accountability.
So leaders need to take the responsibility.
Absolutely.
Okay. Nellie?
Thank you. I'd like to thank Major Whalen and Mr. Choi for being present today. I know we're discussing a very complex issue that requires a certain level of risk and courage to appear before a committee in full public exposure. But those of us who have been placed in appointments of authority are held to higher account and more scrutiny than the average individuals. So thank you for being here. As I've been listening to the different witnesses speaking throughout these committee meetings, there have been a variety of filters around sexual misconduct in Canada's military. There's been some very poignant testimonies from victims, women who've learned essentially to navigate the toxic culture to follow their aspirations. And the minister himself has continued to purport there needs to be a cultural shift. Yet cultural shift can't happen unless there's personal accountability. And so that is what I'd like to ask you about today. I know that, especially in the military, loyalty is very important, but sometimes pressured loyalty causes people to act against their conscience or better judgment. And before processes can be effective, we need to understand the human condition that triggers people to do what is right or wrong. So without disclosing specific details of incidents, begin with Mr. Choi. Could you share if you were ever forced to act against your conscience?
I'm sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. I pushed the wrong button. Thank you for that question. It's a very complex environment, as has been stated. I believe that as leaders, we have to go into the ambiguous zones and be willing to take things on. I can share with you, throughout this ordeal, I personally have stepped in and support people to provide them with support to speak their minds and to offer their stories. And I think leaders at all levels have to be prepared to do that. Regardless of the system and process, we have to be leaders by demonstrating and leading with our heart as well. Thank you.
So was there ever a time that you had to kind of go against what you thought was right?
I think we have many discussions throughout our governance process. I have spoken my mind in areas where I felt that we needed to make changes. And we've had good discussions so that we can make some changes.
So just for time's sake, did you feel that they were effective, or that there could be some mechanisms that could be more conducive to allowing, especially those in civil servants like yourself, to be empowered to do what is right without fear of reprisal? Are there any system processes that could be put in place to make it easier for you to do what is right?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's a very complicated and very good question. I think there's a lot of mechanisms are already in existence for public servants, be it the Ombudsman, the Public Service Integrity Commissioner, to public service disclosures through ADMRS, very myriad through staffing and so on. I think in many ways it can confuse and makes the choices very complicated. I think we need to actually streamline and make it easier for people.
You kept
Sorry,
saying
you're at the end of your time. Now we'll go to Ms. Vandenbeld for the last few minutes.
Thank you very much. And I'll focus my questions on General Whalen. Thank you very much for being here this evening. And a lot of what we have been talking about, and you mentioned it today as well, is making sure that there is trauma-informed supports for those who have experienced sexual misconduct. And then the next step, of course, after that is to make sure that we're preventing it. And that's when we talk about the culture change and getting rid of the toxic masculinity and the process that are in place to try to prevent the negative experiences that women and other men, women, and non-binary and transgender people may feel. But it's more than that. Your position is also one to create a welcoming, inclusive, and positive environment where every single person, including women joining the Canadian Armed Forces, can thrive. So can you talk a little bit, I heard childcare mentioned, and I know that's very important, support for families. I know that there's a Seamless Canada initiative looking at health and well-being as a total well-being, the kinds of training that people can have, the mentorship of women at every step of the way throughout their career to make sure that they have that kind of mentorship, and what we do in terms of recruitment and retention. If I know that's a big question, but I know that it's not enough to stop the problems. We also have to make sure that we build a better environment and create a positive solution. So if you could perhaps talk a little bit about the work that's ongoing and has been ongoing for some time in those areas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to round up a few of those. I'll start with Seamless Canada. Seamless Canada is a wonderful organization or body of Canadian Armed Forces working with provinces and territories to help families who are mobile across this country to remove the barriers that come with asking Canadian Forces members to uproot every few years across the country. And so we have a wonderful relationship with the provinces, and they are working very hard to help families navigate provincial and territorial agencies, support agencies, as the Canadian Forces moves them. So I think that is a very positive. I think in terms of strategies, we are, you will see in the fall of 2021, the creation of the Canadian Armed Forces retention strategy. We haven't had a retention strategy in a number of years. And I think what's important to understand is that that strategy is actually going to work very hard to ensure that those people who don't feel well represented see themselves in all of those support mechanisms that the Canadian Forces has available to them. So we're talking about seeing women, women's health. That's where you're going to see discussions about childcare. That's where you're going to see providing uniform and clothing that's appropriate to women, where we're going to collect data to understand how we can women more, and even including the dress committee. And while it might seem trite as we discuss hair and makeup, not just for women, but for members of the Canadian Armed Forces who feel that this is important to their identity. So there's a tremendous amount of, and I'm only touching the top of the iceberg here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
How much time do I have?
I think we're pretty much at the end of our time,
Okay,
but let's
Madam
leave it
Chair,
there.
If I could, point of order, I just want to confirm that Mr. Choi will table that document that grants him the authority to review, investigate, or dismiss a complaint against the Deputy Minister or a peer in the same chain of command. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Choi, if you can direct that document to the clerk, that would be great. And I just want to thank our witnesses because your testimony was excellent and very helpful to us. And then we'll suspend briefly while we do the sound checks for the next panel. Lieutenant General retired Christine Whitecross, and also Major Kelly Brennan. And each of you will have 5 minutes to greet the committee and make your opening remarks. And we'll begin with you, Lieutenant Whitecross.
Thanks very much and good evening. My name is Chris Whitecross, and I just recently retired from the Canadian Armed Forces in December of 2020 at the rank of Lieutenant General. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today on what I consider to be an important issue for the Canadian Armed Forces, facing the Canadian Armed Forces today and into the future. It's important, I believe, because how we treat people is not just a measure of our values, but of our operational effectiveness as a military force. As someone who grew up in uniform, having spent over 38 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, I am disheartened and angry on hearing some of the witness statements that have come out even as of late, as of this week. And I look forward to responding to your questions in the hopes that we collectively can come up with some concrete steps forward. Thanks very much. I look forward to your questions.
Very good. And now we'll go to Major Brennan, 5 minutes.
I want to thank you, Madam Chair, for this opportunity, and to all the members of the committee. I would like to introduce myself. I'm just one woman who has served in the infantry for the last 30 years, since 1991, and give voice to all the women who need to speak up. I'm a soldier who served, and that service for me has left battle scars, what I call. And I was the subject of many intense and unfair power dynamics throughout my career. So I'd like to outline 4 truths. The first truth is human rights violations are still ongoing in the military. After 30 years, it's not an omission. I think that it's a human rights violation to women. Women want to serve their country with pride, and they want to hold their heads high and contribute. Women want to be free of an environment where they are questioned or catcalled or mistreated or looked down upon and seen as prizes and trophies and assaulted. I think that I need to explain how this feels to go to work every day with that knot in your stomach, how it shapes the way you walk down a hallway, the way that you then perceive men. The second truth would be women are often penalized when they come forward. They're in fear. What will happen? How it will happen? Who will do what? Women are often looked down on or shuffled out of positions quickly if they speak the truth. The guilt that women feel also puts them in a prison where they are made to feel shame, and that's by the very institution that they're committed to serve and still want to serve. The third truth is the military justice systems needs reform. How we conduct military investigations, how we often re-victimize the women that have the courage to come forward. And my focus would be on education and making sure that who investigates can lay the charge, can bring that evidence to court, and not just refer a charge, meaning that the people that are entrusted with it are the people that can affect that change. And we also have to know what that looks like for women. What is justice for women? The fourth truth is leadership needs to be a part of the solution at all levels. The days of leaders using this as leverage, somebody's done something incorrect, and they use that against that person to then gain leverage. The chain of command needs to accept that there has been failure. For 30 years I've served, it's failure. And that failure is a very hard admission to make. In closing, I'd like to reaffirm the most important point of this committee is women are not statistics. They're humans who have been violated by the very service that they believe in. I encourage you all as parliamentarians to give us a voice as you have and enable this change. I truly thank each one of you. I have never been such amongst a panel, a group of women as today. In infantry, I'm always one of one. So today is a very special day for me, and I thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you both for being here. We're going to start our first round of questions with Ms. Alislav for 6 minutes.
Yes, Madam Chair, and I would like to thank the witnesses, and in particular Major Brennan, for the courage that she has shown by coming public and by being here today. We can't fix what we don't know, and without the information, we have no ability to move forward. And I want to also remind her that she has parliamentary privilege, and there should not be reprisals for being here today because we called you. I want to ask, if I could, have you been contacted by the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service as part of the investigation into the allegations against General Vance?
I was, my chain of command reported to the military police and started an investigation. It wasn't the other way around.
And have they contacted you for your statement as part of the investigation?
I was interviewed for 2 entire days, 6 hours each, and deposed information with the CFNIS, evidence and testimony.
Wow. Did General Vance ever instruct you to lie about your relationship?
Madam Chair, yes, it's recorded, and the CFNIS has all of the recordings of him directing me what to say, what not to say, how to say it, what to exclude, to purge myself, and to lie. Because
did he ever threaten you?
A threat, meaning bodily harm? No.
Or
Madam Chair.
Whatever you perceived as a threat? Reprisals, consequences?
Definitely, he gave me very many consequences if I was not following his orders. Madam Chair.
Could you give us an example?
One of the ones that I couldn't figure out the most is I was going to be questioned by his spouse, who's a lawyer, and questioned over and over and over again if I didn't say the right thing, that somehow she was going to come and see me and question me. That I was not to mention certain things about our relationship, our personal lives. The consequences were always the same, that I had to stay silent.
Do you have, did you believed that you didn't have the ability to say no? Is that correct?
I didn't have the ability to say no. They were orders. He would speak until I agreed at length. A one-way talk is what we call it.
Do you have physical evidence of his inappropriate relationship with you? Or any kind of evidence?
Madam Chair, I have deposed that with the CFNIS, recordings, emails, texts, and testimony.
Okay. In your interview with the media, you stated that other senior personnel were aware of the abuse of power that General Vance exhibited toward you. Do you have knowledge that any of them have been contacted as part of the investigation into the allegations against General Vance?
I have no knowledge. After I deposed my testimony twice in February, the only thing I've received is 2 update emails that simply said, we're still on the case. No other information has been given to me.
Are you concerned that perhaps the investigation is not being taken seriously and that it is deliberately being undermined or delayed?
Madam Chair, I asked bluntly the CFNIS if they had the mandate to investigate and did they have the powers to lay charges, and they would not answer me. The answer was no, because as the CDS told me, he was untouchable. He owned the CFNIS.
So are you concerned that despite 2 days of depositions, that there's a possibility that you won't have your day in court, so to speak, and he won't be held accountable?
I definitely feel that there will not be justice for me. And in all honesty, that's okay. Because if my speaking out can change everything for other women to come forward and change our policies, that's okay with me. Because I was first in the infantry when we were allowed to join, and I knew I was taking a hard road.
Very good. Thank you. Now we'll go to Ms. Hutchings for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both to the witnesses, both of you here today. Thank you for your strength in your past. Thank you for the strength here today. And most importantly, thank you for your service. Lieutenant General Whitecross, you've had an extensive career serving both internationally and domestically. What was the culture like in the early stages of your career, and where is it now, and how do you see it moving forward?
Thanks, Madam Chair, for that question. So I've been publicly stated that the culture of the Canadian Armed Forces when I joined, now let's remember I joined in 1982, so almost 39 years ago. And the culture then was a little bit different than now. I joined an occupation that had only just allowed women into the ranks. And they were ill prepared, to be honest, in allowing women to come. But I can't say that I experienced all of the heartache that Major Brennan has expressed. I mean, there would be no secret to say that, you know, it wasn't easy in the first number of years. And in my introspection that I've done as of late really tells me that perhaps in those early years I could have done something a little bit more, but I didn't because, and we can get into that if you're really interested. But throughout the years, throughout the 38 years of service, I have seen a change, and I've seen a change in the grander number of Canadian Armed Forces men and women who now work in uniform across the country and internationally. I honestly believe that the far majority of military folks are integrity-based, and they want to do the best job that they can. That doesn't alleviate the fact that there are still problems, and these problems need to be addressed, and they need to be addressed quickly and as effectively and efficiently as possible. And we need to take really, really great care and really listen to those that have been affected by this insidious behavior. And I think that's the only way that we can go forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Major Brennan, you touched on education, and I've been involved in the discussions across the country from coast to coast to coast as we develop the National Action Plan to end gender-based violence. And we hear often we hear it at every meeting, and we've heard at this committee as well, how important education is, especially education with men and boys. Do you know if that's part of the early training at CAF?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. Segregated training for young boys, no. It's courses that are given just as every other course is given at CFLRS. I was posted there that highlight this education for them like any other course. It's not specific to boys or girls or young men or young ladies that join.
Okay, thank you for that. Lieutenant General, you talk a bit about the international lens and what factors should we consider for CAF members deployed outside of Canada? How can we best address and prevent sexual misconduct in that context?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I don't think we can differentiate the Canadian Armed Forces individuals' behavior, whether they're in Canada or they're outside the boundaries of Canada. The values that we uphold here in Canada have to be distinctly upheld. In fact, probably more importantly in the international theater, because I honestly believe that people look to Canada, really do look to Canada for a value system that isn't necessarily everywhere that we deploy. Having said that, it sounds almost counterintuitive that I would be saying that given the situations as of the last number of months. But I mean, the reality is Canadian Armed Forces members are expected to exhibit high morale, high ethics, whether they're in Canada or whether they're international. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Lieutenant General, I live in a very large rural riding, as my colleagues hear me say often. Do you see any difference in rural and urban where urban behavior of military members, or that doesn't come into play? You just said, everybody's behavior internationally, whether you're internationally or Canada. Do you see any difference in urban and rural? Any behavior patterns?
Thanks for that question, Madam Chair. The answer that I would give is I don't think I ever looked for it. So I would never have presupposed somebody was from a rural or urban area, depending on on the way they treated people. I think the bottom line is, I believe the bottom line is you got to treat everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of where they come from and regardless of where you're working within the confines of Canada or externally. So it almost seriously was never part of my psyche.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Major Brennan, just to get back to my earlier question on GBV, so there's not a lot of sexual misconduct training in the early stages of any CAF career.
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. Not specifically misconduct training. I think that is missing. I think that we could have discussions for prevention and for enlightening new recruits to what it could be like and how to protect themselves. I think that would definitely help.
Merci beaucoup. Maintenant, nous avons Madame Larouche pour 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to Ms. Larouche for 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I sincerely thank our two witnesses today, Ms. Whitecross and Major Brennan. It's very helpful to hear you. Two different experiences of the Canadian Armed Forces, as you pointed out yourselves. But Lieutenant General Whitecross, you mentioned in your opening remarks that there were things that you have heard over the last few weeks, things that you found disheartening in witness testimony, but you didn't add anything. I'd like to hear exactly what you were referring to. What did you find particularly disturbing?
So I have been paying attention to the committee appearances for the last couple of weeks, and I was absolutely dismayed is not a good word. I mean, almost sick to my stomach on the testimony that I had heard Tuesday evening of some current and retired members of the Canadian Armed Forces. So certainly that, and of course the situation that has happened since February in terms of our very senior leadership of the Canadian Armed Forces, in terms of the allegations that are against them. I mean, all of this has been a complete surprise to me, and very, very disappointing.
Donc, à vous entendre,
So, it would seem that you were unaware of all these things. So, do you feel that there is a form of, let's see how I can put it, of omerta, a kind of an imposed silence within the Canadian Armed Forces concerning sexual misconduct? And if so, why is that silence imposed?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am certainly not surprised that sexual misconduct exists. As the committee is probably aware, I led the strategic response team on sexual misconduct after Madame Deschamps' report in 2015, and I had the honor to meet with thousands of Canadian Armed Forces men and women across the country to discuss this behavior and to discuss certainly the value system that the Canadian Armed Forces upholds and is expecting of every single member of the Canadian Armed Forces. And in so doing, I had been privy to many disclosures that, again, were heartbreaking. Many of them were old, granted, but some of them were not. What that did was it was really a watershed moment for me. I may not have been personally experienced such behavior throughout my career, but to listen to people that was literally gut wrenching, to say the least. And so, yes, I'm surprised at what's happened in the last couple of months. But am I surprised that this behavior exists? No, I am not. And that's why I'm pleased that we can hopefully continue with the dialogue and get some measures that are tangible and that can really start getting us back on the right track. Thank you very much.
Très bien. Alors, écoutez, parlant justement de...
Very well. You did testify, Ms. Brennan, about the assault that you have experienced, and you've also said a good deal about power dynamics. You have also told us that a lot of pressure was brought to bear upon you, threats, but were there any other barriers that you faced and that you see when people wish to report sexual misconduct of their superiors?
It looks like
Merci, Madame la Présidente, pour la question. Donc,
Thank you for the question. Thank you, Madam Chair, for this question.
Merci, Madame.
So thank you. Thank you for the question. Can you hear me? So for the threats and abuse of power, threats against women who in service, it's because there's this boys' club culture. And to bring anything up, to go through the chain of command and to be heard creates a situation such that women stop wanting to even try talking about it because it has a direct effect on their career possibilities, on where they're going to be working, on their comrades, on their personal evolution. So to protect themselves, they just don't feel comfortable trying to talk to their superiors, their senior officers. So this is one of the gaps in the procedure, if I understand correctly. The procedure laid out to be able to even report sexual misconduct. I imagine that there are other gaps as well. You mentioned the 2 days of in questioning that you had to put up with. Well, when you want to denounce something, you need to do so with the military police, you see. And that's not always like the ideal place for a woman to speak out for the first time, Madam Chair. It's already difficult to articulate, to find and speak the right words. So if you don't have a resource person with you, especially, to support you.
Brendan, if I could ask, I don't know if there's anyone streaming any data at your house, but the internet connection we're having is spotty. So if you can get them to stop streaming, that would be great if there is anybody doing that. Meanwhile, we're going to go next to Ms. Matheson. And I forgot to say to the folks at the beginning, but thank you again for your respectful tones in this sensitive subject. 6 minutes, Ms. Matheson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I truly appreciate the witnesses who have come forward. You spoke about the honor it is to be here, but it truly, I believe, it is our honor to speak with you today and to hear what you have to add to this difficult subject. Major Brennan, you mentioned the 2 days that you were interviewed, those 6 hours. One of the things that we heard before was that often it's so intimidating and that women who come forward aren't provided with other women interviewers. Were you provided that opportunity? Or did you ask for it? Or
Madam Chair, I think that I was only interviewed by male resources. And when I noted this to them, it actually felt like I had to drag back up 25 years ago when I was a police officer and think about what I should be telling them as mentoring them, because I had to mention many, many, many things to them during the process. It was not fair for a person who didn't know the process. I think it would have been harder on them with a grain of salt.
And so they didn't provide you with that opportunity. They didn't say we will find someone, a woman to work with you in this situation. They just ignored that. Is that correct?
No, they on their many years of service, and that they were very capable of doing it. When I mentioned that the resource, they had stated that a resource was going to be a male to provide me support. I noted to them clearly that had they named the other person behind the desk, because they were pointing at something, that was a female, I would be welcoming to that, but I was not going to enjoy having to explain myself to another male.
I've heard often that beyond that oftentimes for women, even just regular discipline, the consequences of within everyday activities, that women are challenged harder, that they are punished more, that even if they hold rank, that it is constantly challenged. Would you agree to those statements in terms of your personal experience?
Madam Chair, in my personal experience, no matter what rank you hold, it's never equal to, in my profession, in my personal experience, I don't ever hold as high a rank as any male counterpart. Okay. Whether it's that they don't salute me or don't respect if I have something to say, I think that I live that daily.
And in terms of the supports around you, the senior leaders, your senior leadership, was there ever any support that you received in response to that lack of respect shown to you?
Madam Chair, I would have welcomed a mentor that taught me how to be a strong woman in the military. Unfortunately, there really isn't that many women who outrank, who've made it up to general, even in the infantry. So I think that that's to come.
Well, I would say that you're a strong Canadian Armed Forces woman. Lieutenant General Whitecross, as the commander of the Strategic Response Team, as part of Operation Honor, that's now concluded. There's been a lot of comments about its successes or failures, and ultimately failures. What do you think can be learned from that moving forward as the CAF restructures and tries to go forward after Operation Honor?
Thanks, Madam Chair. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it was a complete failure. I think Operation Honor, back in 2015 when we did it, we certainly don't know what we do today, and we don't understand. I think we underestimated the amount of effort and the amount of work and the actual detailed work that's required in order to change a culture. In hindsight, it probably would have been of tremendous benefit had we brought in some cultural experts, organizational cultural experts, in order to help us frame that. But I would say that some of the work that had been done, whether it's the policies, some of the training, I know we had mentioned some of the training, and perhaps Major Brennan it wasn't aware of it, but we have instituted training at all rank levels. Now, it has been fairly recent, granted, so then there's a lot of work to be done. And it's not just individual training, it's senior leader training, it's professional military education, it's bystander training, and a whole bunch of other things. So But having put that aside, yes, all of the foundational work that Operation Honor, we can't throw that away, but we have to build on it. And what we really need to do is bring in my humble opinion, bring in some external experts to really help shape where the next phases are going.
Very good. Now we'll go into our second round of questioning. Ms. Alice Lapp for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And if I could, Major Brennan, in your last comments, you said that General Vance considered himself untouchable. Could you give us an idea of what he meant by that? Did that include, say, the Minister of National Defense, Harjit Sajjan?
Given my, thank you for the question, Madam Chair. The experience, I can only speak from what I know. And when I worked at Downsview in Toronto with Minister Sajjan, who was then Major Sajjan, and we both worked for General Vance, there was a different dynamic. Afterwards, General Vance always told me that he always had him under control. So those were comments to me personally. I can't discuss any of their working relationship because I was not privy to that.
Well, thank you. And so did you have any sort of perspective on any of the other senior officers that perhaps would have been around him at the time? Did he feel that in part the law didn't apply to him?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. In my experience, in many different areas, the law does not apply to him. He doesn't, on a personal note, so he fathered 2 children with me. He's not responsible to pay or to have those children under his responsibility. It's all up to me. So he's excluded himself from a lot of portions of the Canadian society that we hold as responsible. So I think that it's just become a habit with him.
Oh my goodness, that must be very tough on you. You said, and I was discouraged to hear it, that you believe that justice won't come for you, but thank you for doing what you've been doing. But you also mentioned that there were others. I mean, in those 6 hours of 2 days of testimony, it wasn't just General Vance. There were other senior leaders who were complicit either through their inaction or things that they actually did against you. Are you concerned that they won't be held accountable either?
Accountability for their actions will take a court of law or a charge. That is not my goal. If that happens, that will happen. But that's not the reason why I'm doing any of this. I want people to understand the leverage, the power dynamics that play into this, that how leaders grow and use information to then become stronger. And that's what I experienced.
But perhaps this could be viewed almost as an epic battle between the existing culture and the culture that we want to change it to. Do you believe that we can collectively defeat the Boys Club if none of those senior leaders are held accountable for their actions? What does that not risk at the end of the day, them being able to say, see, we won and we've protected the status quo?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. I think that in the military, we win. That's what we're trained to do. I think that winning is breaking the silence. In all honesty, if every woman can speak her truth, that is a win. I think that that is justice.
Could you just tell me what position Major Sajjan had at Downsview when you worked with him?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. To my best recollection, he was a special projects officer.
And what position did General Vance have?
He was the COS. He was the chief of staff.
And you go ahead. Sorry.
We call it a division now, but it was LFCA headquarters back then.
Very good. Now we'll go to Ms. Sidhu for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to both of the witnesses for joining us this evening and for their many years of service to our country. Thank you for your courage. I know this is a difficult and sensitive subject, so I want to tell the witnesses that if there are questions that they feel uncomfortable about, they can choose not to answer. My first questions to General Whitecross. Can you discuss your experience at RMC, and do you have any recommendations for CAF and DND to prevent sexual misconduct and harassment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did not go to Royal Military College except for my master's program. I went to the Sister University of Queens. So I don't have any experience back from the early 80s, what it would have been like while I was there. I can tell you that when I was the chief of military personnel prior to going to NATO, I was responsible for the Royal Military College and had a couple of opportunities to look at how leadership was being developed, the academic program, and a number of other issues. And there had been, and there continues to be, some positive work happening, not just on the sexual misconduct, but a number of different issues, HR issues, particularly mental health as well, and providing mental health to the officer and naval cadets. So that's where my experience lies. Thank you.
And what type of training included in the cadet curriculum can you, especially on the mental health perspective, or any other training?
I am not up to date. I'm sorry, Madam Chair, on that. We can certainly, I mean, I'm sure Major Whalen could get that information for you, Major General Whalen. But I can say that in the last couple of years, there's actually been mental health experts that are physically positioned right at the military college, my understanding, so that they can provide an immediate resource to any of the officer cadets or the staff that may be having any issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Were there any recommendations from the response team on sexual misconduct which you led that have not been implemented?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I've been reading to prepare for this appearance. I've been reading some of the reports from the last little while. Obviously, when I was in NATO, I wasn't particularly into the details of what was been happening here in Canada. But I can say that I could probably estimate that the majority, if not all, of the recommendations that we had put through at that time have been addressed. But in addition to that, a whole slew of new ones also came through by the people that led the strategic response team after my departure. Thank you.
Thank you. And what recommendation would you like to make now?
I mean, I have a couple, to be honest. I think at its fullness, the policies, all of the foundational work needs to be maintained, and we need to work on the policies. We need to work on training and education and all that stuff that's already been talked about. I also believe that it's time to set aside the thought that the Canadian Armed Forces can probably deal with this internally, and that they need to seek resources elsewhere in order to help them out. And if that means an independent review, an independent investigation arm, or an independent judiciary, whatever. I mean, I think we need to be looking at that. I am not convinced that the answer can come from within at this particular moment in time, because we have lost a lot of trust. And so I really would encourage that. But at its fullness, I mean, it's really, there is a congruency with, thank you, there is a congruency with treating people with dignity and respect and being a warfighter. And people that don't believe that, I believe, there's no place for them in the Canadian Armed Forces. And I think we need to be very clear about that. We need to be clear about the expectations and what we will and will not put up with. I mean, there are a number of other things, but I know my time is limited. Thank you.
Very good. Donc, maintenant, Madame Larouche.
Very well. Ms. Larouche, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Once again, I would like to ensure or reassure both our witnesses that we have the highest respect for you and for your testimony here before us today. Lieutenant General Whitecross, do you feel that the internal investigation process is problematic? Correct me if I'm wrong, but in a CBC interview, you said that there is a misunderstanding within the chain of command about denunciation and about to whom victims can go to speak. Could you tell us a bit what the options are and what the best way forward would be for any victim wishing to obtain justice, and just how lucky they're likely to be at getting justice?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I believe my comment on the CBC interview was that there is a misunderstanding within the rank and file, within the uniformed members of the Canadian Armed Forces, of who they can go to. There are a lot of different support networks available, whether they're the chain of command, the MPs, the military police, the medical folks, the SMRC, the ombudsman. I mean, there are a number, but I do maintain that reporting is the number one issue that has to be addressed. People need to feel confident that they can come forward and that their concerns are going to be addressed in a dignified and a very sustained, but also in a very quick and responsive way. And if that means that we need to increase the number of people that they can see to perhaps an external organization of some sort, then I think we need to really be considering that. Thank you.
And Ms. Brennan, when you found yourself stuck in your very unfortunate situation with regard to Mr. Vance, what sort of out did you have? What recourse could you have? Who could you turn to? And thank you for giving us any advice as to what sort of way we could help people in future. Thank you for the question. Being able to denounce, the ability to do so, this is something I'll suggest. Within the chain of command, one can't refuse to be the superior of someone else, a senior officer over a subordinate. But standing back, I think we should be able to say that I'm recusing myself. I withdraw from this position of being this person's boss. So that way, we could shift the situation for many people, because if you know that you shouldn't be in charge of a certain person because you have an intimate relation with them, either a present one or a past one, something that interferes with your ability to judge appropriately how to lead that person. Thank you.
Matheson, 2.5 minutes.
Major Brennan, we've heard, again, in past testimony, there were women who couldn't find justice internally, and they had to take external measures. You yourself said that you may not find justice. Could you expand a bit on that? Do you see sometimes the only way is in an external system?
Thank you, Madame Présidente, for the question. I definitely see that outside of the military.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question.
More natural, because talking to your chain of command about personal issues is not a comfortable thing to do. So definitely, I think that the option, and I think that it should be an independent body of, if you want to name a police force, to investigate where people can go, because these crimes are Criminal Code of Canada crimes. They are not, these are violations of human rights. They are not within the military. They're not within the NDA. And NDA is 129 is misconduct. Mm-hmm. So therefore, I definitely see this being outside of the military. Canadians, military people, but they are still Canadians who have violated the Criminal Code of Canada and should be tried there.
And so, interestingly, we consistently hear about that challenging of the chain of command, and that it's just not done. Can you, in terms of your specific circumstances, you alluded to this before, but in terms of that control, that power, we've heard a lot about power and the not understanding what the responsibility of that power is. But in your specific circumstance, could you talk a bit more and expand upon what you're talking about in terms of the power that General Vance had in your unit and over the people in his command?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. Power dynamics for me, and what I wanted to illuminate is that it's something that you walk up. It's like sometimes they call it the black robe or the boys club. It just means that there's a circle and you're not in it. That there's a power and you are not part of it. You are powerless within that. So if you do one thing in other areas of your career, that's where you're going to feel it, on your PR, on your evaluation. And that's why it's bigger than you.
Very
and that's
good.
why.
And then we'll go now to Ms. Sahota, who's splitting her time with Ms. Alislev.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Major Brannan, you said earlier that, and I quote, "I definitely feel there will not be justice for me." That's not the Canada any of us stand up for, and let alone you put the uniform for. So I'm going to ask you, is there anything you want to say to General Vance for what he put you through, and to Canadian Armed Forces who have allowed such activities and culture to run rampant?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. I honestly would just like the truth. I have no goal. I have no aim. I just want the truth. And that's what would satisfy me, is the truth.
Ms. Alislev.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I'd like to ask General Whitecross. She gave the impression, you gave the impression that this gives you a change in perspective and perhaps the breadth and depth and scope of what the Canadian Forces is facing. I wonder, if you were in your position again, what would you do differently? And is a culture change going to take more than processes? Will it also need to have accountability of those who have behaved inappropriately and oversight of those individuals?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if I was still serving, I think my focus would be on maintaining the momentum that has been created in the last couple of months to ensure that we do hold accountable those individuals that have broken the law or gone conduct contrary to what is expected of a Canadian Armed Forces member. I am not completely unconvinced that that won't happen. So, you know, I feel for just promoted you, for Major Brennan. I feel for her. I feel for the situations that she and many of her colleagues have been through. I do not believe that the majority of Canadian Armed Forces women or men, for that fact, are are participating in this insidious behavior or are victims of this type of behavior. And I shouldn't use the word majority, but I would say not all, certainly not all are. But I would say that we need to maintain the momentum that has been created by the last couple of months. I think this is a watershed moment. I mentioned this in the past. This is something that you cannot let go, and we must maintain not just the work in the foundational work that is required, but we also need to be holding people accountable, all ranks. And that includes microaggression. So people saying things that they think are funny, we need to tell them that's not funny. In fact, that's, you're crossing the line. And I think we need to be far more vocal. Sorry, I interrupted you, but far more vocal at these little things so that they don't start to grow. As Madame Deschamps said, I mean, you create a sexualized culture that allows small things, and then that morphs into very large behaviors that are completely contrary. And I think we need to address them right at the beginning. Sorry, long answer. Thank you.
We heard from another witness who said, this is too important to get it wrong. And if we don't get this right, there will be an even greater loss of confidence that we can get anything right. And that's why I was asking if you agree with that. And like you said, that it starts from the little things, but that it is about individuals and their behavior and being held to account as much as it is about processes. Would you think that that's fair?
Absolutely fair. It is about people. Behaviors, a respectful work environment is about how people treat people. And if they aren't living up to the values that we espouse as military folks, then I think they're in the wrong business, regardless of whether they're in the military or anywhere else. I mean, this sort of behaviors just shouldn't be accepted at any stage. Thank you.
Very good. And now we'll go to the final 5 minutes to Ms. Vandenbeld.
Thank you very, very much. And Major Brennan, I want to thank you so much for your courage in speaking up. And I do very much believe that you speaking up and the chain of events that has happened since is making a very big difference. And I want you to know that. So I do want to ask and I'm really sorry that you have to relive all of these things again in your testimony today. I know that is something that's very, very hard to do. But there was just one thing that you said in your testimony that I just wouldn't mind getting clarification. And that is when you said that you worked with Minister Sajjan in Downsview, which I believe is in Toronto. What year was that? If you could just clarify the testimony on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. I was posted in January 2006, and I left in April, May 2008. So it was between that time. I would say that he came in after me. I don't know his exact dates when he was posted in or posted out. I would have to look on a record.
Okay. And I mean, it's just for the record. I'm not questioning you. I just know that Minister Sajjan also testified, and I verified, has never worked in Toronto. So, he was a reservist in Vancouver, and he did his workup training in Edmonton. So I'm not questioning. I just wanted to try to get some clarification so we can figure out exactly what happened there. But that's not the reason we're here today. Today we're here because we want to make sure that what happened to you never happens again to anybody. And that would be my other question then for both you, Major Brennan, and also General Whitecross. How do we prevent this kind of thing from happening in future? Are there things that we could do differently right now that will create a situation where this kind of thing simply doesn't happen? I mean, it's important to get support for survivors, which we've talked about, but we want to stop it in the first place. So I'll start with Major Brennan, and then I'll like to hear from General Whitecross.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. I think that if I had to give one nugget of what we could do to change and what would have helped myself and many women that I've spoken to, is that obedience does not mean silence. meaning that if a woman is hurt and wants to speak out of turn, that I don't think that she should be silenced and told by the chain of command to stop acting like that and get over it. You chose a hard career, adapt and overcome.
Thank you. General?
So there are two aspects to why we want to treat people well. There's the social imperative, I would call it, which is just that it's the common sense right way to treat humans. But there's the operational imperative, which is we cannot be an effective military force doing some very dangerous work if not everyone in the organization feels as though they are a part of the team and that they are being respected and that they are able to, be as good as a person and bring to the team as much as they can. So having said that, as a marker, I would say that the one thing that we need to do, and I believe you've already mentioned it, a number of you have already mentioned it, and that is we need to hold people to account and people need to report. We need to make sure that that we're not creating an environment or maintaining an environment where people are afraid to come forward. And we need to create the environment where a dignified and respectful workplace is the norm. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very good. And thank you to our witnesses. Thank you for your service, for your bravery, and for making a difference in the study that we're performing. Now, for the committee members, I remind you that we resume on Tuesday for our rural and unpaid final panels. Is it the pleasure of the committee to adjourn? Seeing that it is, have a great night, and we'll see you Tuesday. Adjourned.
Bonne soirée tout le monde.